Maybe you've seen my videos, maybe you haven't, but I often call out tokenism among comic writers, which is cornballish and lazy. This approach isn't really anything new, don't get me wrong, it's just more noticeable as writers in recent decades are pretty open about their intentions due to the age of social media. And by tokenism, I mean specifically either changing a pre-established character and making them a minority in, let's say, name or alias for the sole reason of diversity or representation efforts. So that includes both changing of an established character and making him black, such as like Wally West, or taking a historically white character's power base and just making another version of him that's black, or of another race like Miles Morales. Of course, sometimes these character changes are tolerable, but for the most part they are corny, forced, lazy, unnecessary, and sometimes even insulting, as it is nothing more than a bone of tokenism. Now I get it. I am a capitalist and I understand that it is a difficult thing to do to make a marketable, new and fresh character. You know, it's easy to make a black version of an established character that will catch on because people are more familiar with it. And I know there are attempts that have not caught on, but laziness or lack of creativity is not an excuse. It's a market and some things will catch on, some won't, but give it a shot. But tokenizing established characters is forever whack. I don't care about the excuse of utilizing different timelines or universes. Unfortunately, some people will claim racism when you point out this tokenism, but they are just as lazy as the writers. Now, many people like myself that point this out obviously aren't opposed to black characters. We just want original characters with their own unique backgrounds, instead of just, piggybacking off of others with the same damn power. So in this video, we will focus on Marvel characters. Here are my top 3 black comic book characters that I believe have potential or should simply be expanded on. Black Panther, Luke Cage, Falcon, and others all recently have been shown a lot of love in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and are insanely popular right now, so I'm not going to include them purposely. All right, now let's get into it. Coming in at number 3 is Brother Voodoo. Now, Brother Voodoo is not a relatively new character, as he first appeared in a Strange Tales issue back in the 70s. Because he is rather old, there are a couple of different variations of his origin, but the core of the character really is much of the same. Now, Brother Voodoo's real name is Jericho Drum, and he's a Haitian American. Say what you will about the stereotypes of black folks being into voodoo and mythical stuff, but to me, that shit is intriguing and a source of power that I do not think has been explored nearly enough because the possibilities are endless. Jericho Drum is a rather educated psychologist practicing in America before he goes back to Haiti to see his dying brother. His brother was hurt by a voodoo practitioner by the name of Zobop, who was claiming to be Damballa, which is a god. So Daniel, Jericho's dying brother, asked him to train under Papa Jumbo, who is of course the person that had been training Daniel. So Drum trains of all the rituals and cool things and then has the spirit of Daniel placed inside of his own soul before Papa Jumbo passes. So of course he ends up defeating this false god and becoming the true lord of the lore and thus becoming Brother Voodoo. As far as his powers, just imagine the endless amounts of things that he can do that's centered around voodoo alone. Of course he has the superhuman strength, but it's much more than that because part of his strength comes from the fact that he has the spirit of his brother in him, and then he has all of these sorts of other cool different things that he can do as well because of his mythical powers from his connection with the lore and the spirit guide, so they can really just make stuff up along the way. So he's able to do things such as, manipulate fire and control humans and animals through hypnosis. Now, you could see Brother Voodoo in the comics teaming up with folks like Spider-Man and of course other black superheroes such as Black Panther and Luke Cage, but I don't think he has been explored enough, don't get me wrong. He has appeared in comics in recent decades and looks pretty badass, even at one point replacing Doctor Strange as Supreme Sorcerer. But maybe more than anybody on this list, he could benefit in live action depictions, which will in turn make people fall in love with him and discover him, much like they did with Black Panther recently. Imagine the cool things that they can do with this character to make his powers really come to life with visual effects that they simply did not have access to back in the day, for example, when the character was created. This to me is a gold mine that Marvel is sitting on. Coming in at number 2 is Cinch. Cinch is a character that hasn't really been developed nearly enough, though he does make several appearances, most of which are centered around the X-Men. But he does have a unique skill set that can absolutely be overpowered. His first appearance was in the early 1990s X-Men comic on issue number 36. His real name is Everett Thomas, and he's from St. Louis. In this issue, an alien race known as the Phalanx are abducting young mutants. Between this conflict, this is where we learn of his powers and his ability to mimic the powers of anybody with superpowers. Yes, so on his own he isn't of much use, but in a world surrounded by mutants and superpowered beings, he is very useful, and that's why I say he's overpowered, which is what makes him interesting. Possibilities are again endless, and he's appeared here and there, but certainly not enough. So the more interesting thing about him isn't as of yet like his storyline or like particular arcs and his origin or anything like that. It's his actual power, which can absolutely influence some really incredible storylines on that idea alone. Again, Cinch can sniff out anybody with superpowers in his area, and he can duplicate their powers. In some instances, he can even control these powers better than the person whose powers he's duplicated. Now, of course, Marvel and other comics have explored ideas of beings taking the powers of other beings, and that in itself isn't really unique, but here we have someone whose sole power is to be able to mimic anybody with superpowers, along with the intellect of being able to use it in possibly new and more powerful ways. So arguably he can be stronger than the person's power he's taken. Just use your imagination here. On this concept alone, he could be one of Marvel's most powerful characters. And coming in at number 1 is, of course, the OG, Blade. There's a specific reason that's a little different from the others as to why I mentioned Blade. He's not as prominent in recent years as the Black Panthers of the world, so he makes the list, but he is still utilized in the comics and has been depicted in live action films before. Blade's character by itself, and being this half immortal vampire slayer, is badass, but he's arguably the first Black Marvel character to have a rather blockbuster film, if you want to call it that, and he did this without needing the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So he's on this list because he's a prime example of what I'm talking about regarding Black Marvel characters seeing success and being embraced by fans. He's an original. He was not just this white guy that they turned black. He's not a black version of another pre-existing Marvel superhero. He's just Blade. And here's the kicker. I talked to many people that have seen and enjoyed this movie, and they have no idea that Blade is a Marvel character. I mean, yes, it helps having Wesley Snipes act him out, but he's still based on the comic book character, and we obviously saw the character match the movie in the comics in the late 90s. Now, I personally think now more than ever would be a great time to reestablish this character in live action films. Again, the technological growth with special effects and whatnot would make for a killer movie and or show if done right. Blade is one of my favorite comic book characters, and I'm not going to lie, I got a little sour at the lack of respect shown to Blade when Black Panther came out and people were like, finally a black comic book character with a great movie, as if OG Blade doesn't exist. But to be fair, as I mentioned, those that say things like that never knew that Blade was a Marvel character or even a comic book character. But he reeks of badassness in terms of how he handles his weaponry. I mean, we're talking about a dude walking around in shades, fucking up monsters and vampires and shit. Man, y'all better put some respect on Blade's name. There are obviously Black Marvel characters that I didn't mention. Bishop, which made a bunch of appearances in the 90s X-Men cartoon, was a runner-up. There's also Blue Marvel that I didn't include, and I actually like to admit that Blue Marvel is a sort of cool character with great power, but his backstory doesn't really fit in the context of this video because of how forced it is regarding the aspect of race. He's arguably one of the more powerful Marvel black superheroes, but you know, that's neither here nor there. The idea isn't to just name off a bunch of black Marvel superheroes, but rather to give my thoughts on who I think should be expanded upon. You know, these original, unique characters have aspects that can be explored without tokenizing them. I cannot stress enough how lazy it is just to throw in a token and piggyback off of another established white character's branding. No matter the universe and no matter if it ended up catching on, which it does with some characters, it's still lazy, still unnecessary in a world, especially where live action depictions are more prominent than ever and can help develop a character, thus driving up your comic book sales in general. Let's stop tokenizing, bro.